disruption seems to be coming one way or another. If you look around the world, incumbent governments are being swept away, all sorts of different populist parties or insurgent parties are coming in to take control, and they are doing very big and profound things to institutions. So if you're a centrist incumbent party with a kind of moderate position, you need to look at whether you're prepared to make that disruption yourself or whether somebody else is going to disrupt the world for you.
Today, my guest is Sam Sharps. Sam Sharps is the Executive Director of Policy at Tony Blair's Institute for Global Change. Sam, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me today. Please introduce yourself at the Institute and tell us what you do.
Thanks so much, Pete. Delighted to be here. So my name's Sam. I look after policy at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. As you say, Tony Blair Institute really brings together everything that Tony Blair, former UK Prime Minister, did in his post-political career. So he spent some time advising governments around the world on how to govern. He spent some time supporting peace, stability and good governance, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, but also some other places. He did other work around interfaith dialogue and preventing extremism. And at a certain point, he wanted to bring all these things together in one institute. And today, the institute is getting on for about 1,000 people across the world. We're in about 40 countries, and we do two basic things. We provide consultancy-style hands-on advisory work for governments around the world, usually located in the national capital and usually embedded with the Prime Minister or President's office, where we have locally engaged staff who work day to day with those prime ministers and presidents to help them govern. And we do what I look after, which is the original policy research and analysis function within TBI. That's mostly based in London, but we have some colleagues elsewhere as well. And we really look at all of the issues that political leaders and policymakers think about. That's education and the economy and climate and science and technology and all of these things with a technological lens applied to them. And we produce original reports, papers. We promote these through the media. We talk to them at conferences. We use them to work with stakeholders. And so I'm lucky to have the role of trying to look after the kind of intellectual battery of the institute and make sure that our ideas and research are at the cutting edge of where technology is at so that we can make the biggest impact for the government clients we work with.
Super exciting, yeah. Thank you. So if I understand you correctly, you focus on advising governments and leaders, right, how to modernize institutions, policies, and services, and especially using that digital innovation and AI, that's a big keyword that's right now. Do I understand it correctly?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So Tony's had the conviction for some time now that the real test of which political leaders will be successful and which won't is how they adapt to the technological revolution. In other words, are they prepared to face up to the challenges and the changes that undoubtedly AI and other technologies are bringing? And are they geared up to seize the opportunities that it gives you? So there are obvious examples across public services where the first time ever we can think about doing some public service work that governments deliver, whether it's educational, health or transactions or whatever, in a radically different way, in a much less human contact way, to provide massive efficiencies and to make much better, more targeted interventions for the people who really need it. Likewise, there's always questions around how you support your economy and your society through transitions, and AI is going to make big differences in the way that people work and what people's jobs look like. And then there's a governance question about how do you ensure that the technology is managed and controlled and looked after in the right way that addresses societal concerns and all the things you worry about, but also doesn't prevent the real benefits of technology coming through. So about 3 years ago, we were really a little bit of a voice in the wilderness on some of these issues. Found it a little bit difficult to engage particularly political audiences to understand why technology is important, why these were things they really needed to focus on. Fast forward 3 years and suddenly, as you say, AI is a massive buzzword. It's something that everybody is talking about, everybody wants advice and support on. So we're in a really strong position to work with political leaders and to try and lead that debate.
Wow, fantastic. Yeah, it's super exciting what you do, right? We've had a discussion before we started this podcast. Obviously, that's what we do. We really work with companies that specialize in AI, and the space is changing so quickly. Was actually fantastic 2 years ago. Now things are 10 times better, faster. And what you're doing is advising and trying to implement this with governments and consult them and tell them what are the options. From your experience, what are the biggest obstacles for governments to start adopting digital innovation, AI, all that technology that is available? What's that number one, standout obstacle for them?
Well, very often there's a simple question of attention. Very few presidents and prime ministers have been elected on a technology specific platform. They haven't come to power to make big technological changes. They've come to power because there's a big problem in their health service, or because the economy's not good, or because they've got great ideas on foreign policy, or whatever it might be. And so getting their attention, and not to patronize any of these people because they're all like much more impressive than I am, but if you're a 50 something politician who's spent his or her time in politics, these issues can seem a little bit obscure and a little bit distant from the things you need to be thinking about. So there's the kind of, raising awareness and getting people's attention challenge first. The second one, once they've bought into the idea that technology can transform some of the things they're doing, is just getting them to invest the time and effort to drive through change. So I think very often one of the themes of the things we talk about is that even politicians who kind of get the principle look at technology as something that might improve efficiency in one corner of their government, or they could try a pilot on something. Very few of them really grasp the initiative to say, actually, there's a massive opportunity to transform everything we're doing here, to fundamentally rethink the way this department works or the way this service works. And I can kind of understand why, because these are big undertakings. They're very, very profound changes. There'll be a lot of institutional opposition to it, but also these issues matter, right? You can't just carve up your education or health service on the basis you think you might improve it, because people's lives are at stake. Real life outcomes for people who really matter are at stake. And so there is a kind of institutional bias against really radical reform. One of the big arguments we're now having, though, is disruption seems to be coming one way or another. If you look around the world, incumbent governments being swept away, all sorts of different populist parties or insurgent parties are coming in to take control, and they are doing very big and profound things to institutions. So if you're a centrist incumbent party with a kind of moderate position, you need to look at whether you're prepared to make that disruption yourself, or whether somebody else is going to disrupt the world for you. And I think our argument usually is it's much better for you to be in the position of driving that disruption yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you specialize more in, the central governments, or also work with smaller localized governments? Just because I wanted to touch on a little bit more maybe on those small governments here, how they can drive change. And it's probably because of my actually personal experience, how I use those much often than I use the centralized one. I'll give you a great example. I was doing a parking permit the other day, literally. That's why I remembered about this. And it's a very simple thing, just pay local government for parking permits right outside of my office. But the process is so 1996, right? I had to write an email. They sent me a link, and it failed. They said if they going to fail once, I need to request another link for payment. Then I had to go to the council, pick up this. It took an hour and a half, something that any other business, if that would be a business, they will resolve it in a self-service portal. It will take me 2 seconds. Remember my card from last transaction, right? And you'll be delivered in the post 2 days later. So are you supporting also and consulting smaller governments, local governments as well, or you usually work with the leaders of government?
So we tend to work at a national level. It's not our exclusive focus. In fact, we've got some good work in the pipeline within my team on AI within local government and some of the changes that could be made, because very often these are the things that do drive people nuts. It's your ability to get your parking fees, get your bins collected, to apply for a school, and these are all handled at the local level, and could be done in a much more straightforward and consumer-friendly way. What's really interesting about some of the governments we work with, they do work with some very big governments, but also we work with some small island states and some much smaller governments where actually you see some more of the innovation happen. You see more technological changes. You see politicians who are prepared to be a lot more user-friendly with their citizens, and that could be because they're somewhat closer to the people. It's a smaller environment in which they get more feedback, they get more understanding of what people need. And I am a big believer that can drive real change. And at a local level in the UK, for example, but it could be in other countries, you can get little pockets of innovation where local leaders with a particular agenda can do really, really interesting things. The challenge for national government then is to take the best of that and spread it around and make sure you don't end up with a totally fragmented system. The big examples that often gets quoted to me, which is not a public service per se, but it's something all of us use, is the number of parking apps on your phone or my phone is completely out of control. Depending where you are in the country, depending which car park it is, it could be one of any 10 apps, which seems completely ludicrous and un-user-friendly. Well, you could end up in a similar situation in government services, depending where you live, or who provides the services, or whether it's central or local. So there is a little bit of aggregation together. And one great example I've seen of that recently was a visitor from Kyiv in Ukraine who showed me the app that citizens in Kyiv are using, obviously under very extreme circumstances and a real drive for security and all sorts of other reasons. But all of their services come together in one app. It's really user friendly. It's really simple to access and to use, and the take up is incredibly high. I think they set really, really good examples of what local governments and smaller governments can do, but ultimately what national governments should be thinking about as well.
Yeah. I completely understand this because obviously, we had a little bit of discussion before the podcast. It's easier for the companies to go to local government, and we discussed an example of GPs. Let's test this and pilot this on 3, 5 GPs, right? But if we're based in Portsmouth, one company does a little bit in Portsmouth, and someone does a different pilot in Leicester, and someone does different pilots in there. The second in 2 years' time, when actually they're all there is 27 different providers doing very similar things. So obviously there is a big challenge there. But what could those centralized governments learn from local governments in that agility and how they actually approach this? Because obviously the change happens much quicker the smaller the task is, right?
Yeah, well, I think that's exactly right. And to be fair, there's never really been a total shortage of innovation within the NHS, whether it's at GP level with foundation hospitals. Things are happening all the time, which are leading to better patient outcomes, to better care, to better information for patients. The problem is, at the same time, other things are happening, which could be good, bad, or mediocre. And in an ideal world, you'd think, well, a bit of fair competition is great. Portsmouth could be doing something, Southampton could be doing something better. If Portsmouth does it better, then that's the solution that wins out. Ultimately, central government has to play a role, though, because there's a shortage of information between those different areas. There's kind of all sorts of sunk costs and institutional obstacles to changing. And the simple availability and promotion of here's the number one diabetes app that happens to be created in Durham but could be of use in Plymouth. That kind of thing is a real absence at the moment. So I think there's always been a role for, to take the health service example, there's always been a role for the National Health Service or for the Department of Health to grab the best of those and somehow promote those around the country, and in extremis, I suppose, impose a single solution. That's not really in keeping with the way we think about public services, but there will be instances where rather than have people duplicating efforts everywhere, they need to pick a solution and say, actually, this is the one we're going to go for.
Yeah, absolutely. So how then, and let's now direct more towards what we do as a company. Obviously, we work with quite a lot of digital innovation companies specializing in AI. They do have great solutions, government ready very often. What can they do to really have that foot in the door with some government agencies, start those conversations? Because what I hear from them, you're not included in those big conversations. You have to be a huge company into billions, right, to really sit down and have conversations about some solutions database for the whole of government, but they have some amazing products and services ready for testing. What can they do to start those conversations with governments?
Yeah, it's really difficult, and they do need some support. Certainly, if you go back to, I think, the David Cameron administration, one of the big changes they tried to make early on was to look at the way government did IT, and it was dominated by a handful of very, very large firms. Systems integrators were establishing these enormous and quite ornate projects, which obviously locked out lots and lots of smaller suppliers. And David Cameron administration took some big steps at that point to say, actually, that this can't go on. We need a more open system. We need smaller scale projects that scale up as opposed to, these enormous umbrella projects. And that went some of the way to doing it. One of the obstacles I've heard from smaller companies who would still like to break into this market, though, is that government procurement tends to be a fairly cumbersome, fairly difficult machine to operate. There are very good reasons why you want to protect taxpayer money, and you want to make sure that the people you're recruiting or hiring to do your work are legitimate and not going to rip you off and all the rest of it. But that, as with lots of other sorts of government activity, plays out in very lengthy, very cumbersome information requests and processes. And smaller businesses don't really have the luxury to say, okay, we'll spend 6 months trying to bid for this thing that might come to absolutely nothing in the end. And that's to everybody's detriment. So some of the work we've done with the British government and others is around actually how do you have a more nimble and agile procurement policy that allows you to take limited risk and start small pilot projects, but scale them up quite rapidly. And that can include smaller businesses. And how do you streamline and isolate the amount of information you're asking for so that people know pretty quickly where they stand and don't waste their time and money. Having said all that, there's still a massive job, and it's very difficult for smaller businesses. We're not really in the business that you are in terms of brokering those conversations, but I think there is more of a willingness and more of an interest in central government now than ever before to work with smaller businesses and to look for opportunities. Some level of engagement is really important, and understanding what's possible is part of our job and is part of what we're trying to promote.
Yeah, I completely understand this. Obviously, the brokers for those deals, it's not what you do, and we've been selling digital innovation for quite some time. And I tell you what really works is grabbing attention of the decision makers and then having opportunity to educate them what's possible. Because none of those products are done and they just plug in, right? Obviously, they go through really deeper discovery, earning the trust and saying, hey, I could optimize this for you, right? I can see this process for those 7 people in this office takes them 4 hours every day. And that could be completely automated, right? Obviously, very often we find that there's a question of someone's going to be losing some jobs, right? Because essentially that's what automation and AI very often does. So this is another layer of a problem, which we can discuss in a second. But what I'm referring to is it's essentially just starting those conversations, because I work in digital innovation. And I've told you before, we started this podcast. I've jumped on hundreds of conversations with business owners from different companies. I wasn't aware how amazing products are ready for implementation, right? So obviously those governments that use local government, someone working here, don't have even 10% of that knowledge that I have. So they'll be very surprised as long as those business owners have a chance to show it to someone, right? Now, our government's actually scared of people losing their jobs because of all that AI and automation. And I think, what happens now in states and in theory kind of looked really good, but they went very aggressive way. And obviously now people are a little bit against the whole new innovation and implementation. So is it the same conversations here about, okay, we can improve this? That means that's layoffs, right? And people are going to be losing jobs.
Yeah, well, it's a completely valid question. And I think some people and some political leaders we talk to definitely are scared of that. There is a big change coming. There's a lot of disruption. Some of the benefits are yet to be kind of realized or yet to be absolutely concrete. But in the meantime, you might lose jobs. You might see people who have been doing very worthy and very important jobs rendered less important. I think there's a couple of important things to point out to all of them. One is that AI as a tool isn't necessarily always going to be labor replacing, it's more labor enhancing. So if you're a teacher, this is the example we go to very often, you probably spend a lot of your time lesson planning, a lot of time marking work, a lot of time on the kind of admin and non-teaching activities. Actually, if technology could take some of the strain of that away from you, you could spend more time one-to-one with pupils, you could spend more time doing the thing you've actually been recruited to do and that presumably is your passion. So there's a big component there. But the other one, which we really shouldn't shy away from, is that technology is an efficiency enhancing process, but it can be transformative as well. And to take a quite provocative example, we've talked about GPs quite a lot on this conversation. It is a legitimate question to say the model of GPs that was established, 80 years ago, as a kind of single gatekeeper, a repository of knowledge about pretty much all of medicine, and the person you develop a relationship with and kind of go to for the bulk of your life. Maybe that doesn't apply anymore. Maybe we need to rethink the way we provide health services so that it's quicker, more efficient, more specialized. Yes, of course, you would still have people in that community doctor role, but they'd be much more focused on acute cases where there's a lot of collaboration needed. What they wouldn't be doing is seeing people with coughs and sniffles and then people with a much more serious condition, which requires a letter to be written to a hospital and another test somewhere else, which the GP doesn't deal with. That's a very expensive way to deal with that front door for the NHS. And so the proposition for politicians and for people working in the health services, actually, there might be a different way to manage all of this stuff. And technology gives us the ability to at least triage the first stage of people's interaction with the health service so that we can do that at a much better cost.
It's a very good observation, actually. Obviously, we were discussing GPs. I love the example of teachers because they're not going to be losing jobs. They're going to just not overwork themselves because maybe some homework could be massively supported with AI, maybe a prep for the schools and so on. But yeah, the GP is a very good example. I always like to give examples on myself. I don't have that relationship with my GP. I don't think it is in theory, but I don't see my GP often enough to even remember the name of that person, right? And we discussed even before because there are solutions, I've talked to business owners that they could take the first 15 minutes of GP visit on the phone with natural language, when the GP asks the questions with AI, by the time they arrive there for the 15 minutes, 20 minutes of the actual visit, the GP is prepared. It's got all the information that is needed, right? Well, from what they told me when they implemented in the different governments and maybe private sector, it actually reduced visits because some of them were actually resolved on that phone call. Nothing else was needed. There was no visit needed, right? So they are obviously that beautiful. We had. So how would companies start going after? Who should they go to and where? Right? I've talked very recently with a CEO of Medigold, and they actually are health providers for private companies at a big scale. I think there was a big chunk of the UK is already served by them through the companies that they work for. So if Alex, the CEO, could go and speak to someone and show them what he's got, and just to get someone's attention, opinion, just to educate them what's possible, maybe even work better on his product, right? After the feedback, because obviously it doesn't mean that he's going to implement it next week. I know it's not going to move that fast. Some of those companies could really start outreaching within the government.
Yeah, I mean, one of the issues for the government is that some of the kind of technical capability within the government is in need of improvement. I think they need more technical people. They need more people who are clued up on the state of the art and the state of the industry. And that's another of our recommendations. It's something we'd like to see the government working on. It's an investment for the government, clearly, to get these good people in because they're not super cheap, but it's also something that could pay benefits over quite a long period. In the meantime, there are pockets of excellence, certainly within the government. There are certainly people working in the Department of Health. There are people who are working in the government data service. There are people, certainly the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology is a really, really good example where people get it and are super supportive, and I think we'll be very, very open to conversations. So one of the big things that I've been pleased with in the last 6 months is the AI Opportunities Plan, which a guy called Matt Clifford ran for the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, setting out a set of really positive and ambitious things the government could do to support AI. He and his team are still operating. There's still a team within there who are interested in innovation and things that could be done differently. And I think people like that, whether it's exactly the right answer for the example you're thinking of, people like that are still driving that agenda forward. And I think they would always welcome understanding from the private sector about what's possible and what's achievable.
And, very interestingly, very often those companies actually could work, pair what they actually do, right? There's not even the massive setup up front. Is well, let's test it. We do per visit, still cheaper than any other form that we've had over the last 20 years, right? And let's test it out. And I'm pretty sure there'll be quite a few people like me, right? The patients that would actually very happily test those things. Very interesting. Okay, how do you think it's going to, shape out in next 5-10 years? You have probably quite a lot of the discussions. You have those discussions with people that do make those decisions as well. What do you think the UK's and AI and that technology is going to look like in 10 years' time?
Well, there's a real opportunity and there's a real sense of enthusiasm and possibility right now. It's very difficult to predict. One of the concerns I've had for some time is that we'll get a downswing in AI optimism. So right now, lots of people are pining about AI. Lots of people are talking about the possibilities. At some point, there will be a project that falls over or a business that fails or some scandal that we hadn't quite foreseen, and that will lead to real concerns about actually was this all overhyped? Did this really have the promise that people made out? And I think one of the challenges for the industry and challenges for people like myself and like my institute who are very keen to promote the possibility of the technology is to not keep the faith exactly, but to put that in perspective and to make sure that the broader gains are understood and realised, even where there are problems that need dealing with. So my forward look is actually quite optimistic. I think there's a lot of change that could be achieved, particularly in the public sector, but also more widely. I think the government is on the right path to make those changes and to support a lot of that. It's going to need a lot of commitment and it's going to need a lot more drive and ambition, probably from the centre of government, but also in other places. But overall, I think we're heading in the right direction.
Yeah. I agree. And thank you for what you do actually for that very reason, because you actually educate that very first step governments, those people that make those decisions, right? To show them what's possible, show them the policy, what could go wrong, right? How to approach this, how different governments approach it, how companies do it. So thank you for this. Now, if someone would like to find what you guys do at the Institute, maybe connect with you, where can they find you?
So our website is very, very easy. It's institute.global. That you'll find there all of our published work, a load more information about what we're doing around the world, case studies, different governments, and so on. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. You can find my name. It's fairly unique, SHARPS. So that's nice and easy. And lots of colleagues publish stuff on LinkedIn. I'm always open to connections and to chatting to people, and they're coming through quite a lot these days. So please keep them coming.
Fantastic. Yes, I know you're very active on LinkedIn. And if someone would like to meet Sam, please reach out. We'll leave those links below so you can see. Sam, thank you very much for joining me today and sharing everything that we've been doing and how it looks like from your point of view, from the government point of view, because obviously we focus on the more business point of view. So we have our opinion on this, but you actually open up some more possibilities and how to approach this and really how to think about this. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate this.
Pleasure, Pete. Thanks so much.